This is Down the Rabbit Hole, where we question the mysteries and nature of reality. I'm your host, Justin Perry. My grandmother is from a different timeline. Quite a few years ago, something very strange was shared with me, and it's always stuck in my mind. A few years back, I flew to Alabama for my grandmother Betty's 85th birthday and a small family reunion. The celebration was great. My grandmother had her favorite foods, all of her children, and many of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren attended. My grandmother lives in a huge estate in a gated community. She lives alone, but has several private nurses and housekeepers as well as a cook. Money has never been an issue for her. My grandfather Robert came from a well-to-do family. I mention this now because it's relevant later on. Everyone seemed happy during the festivities, except for my grandmother. She tried to appear happy, but I could tell something was definitely bothering her. At the time, I thought she was just tired or a bit fatigued. At her age, a birthday celebration can be exhausting. I also had the thought that she was dealing with health issues. I didn't want to pry or cause any additional distress, so I didn't ask any questions, but I kept observing her. During the party, I had a quiet conversation with one of my grandmother's housekeepers. I asked her, "Is Gram okay?" And she replied, she's been having dreams of living on another earth. As the days went by, most of my family went back to their own lives. My cousin Margot and I were the last people to depart. On the last day, Margot and I went to see Graham one last time. Margot and I didn't have to leave to go to the airport until 9 p.m. So when we got to my grandmother's house at 11 a.m., we knew that we had a lot of time to kill. When we entered the house, my grandmother's housekeeper informed us that grandmother was still sleeping and we were not to disturb her. So Margot and I went into one of the living rooms and turned on the TV. About an hour later, my grandmother came out downstairs, and before we could say anything, she said, "Turn that TV off," as loud as she could. Margot and I looked at each other, shocked. We thought the volume had been too loud. We didn't know why she was so upset. I said, "I'm so sorry, Gran. Was the volume too loud?" She didn't even respond or look at me or anyone. So finally, I just asked her, "Gran, are you okay?" Grandmother sat down and said, "No, I'm not okay. I never have, and I never will be, not on this earth." I asked, "Please tell me what's going on." The room was silent for minutes, but my grandmother looked up at us and said, "I want to tell you about the pillowcases and my other life." Margot and I looked at each other and didn't know what the hell Gran was talking about, but we listened, and this is where one of the most interesting stories I have ever heard starts. Gran told us that in 1945, she had a fiancé named James, and that he was the love of her life. That came as quite a shocker because no one in the family had ever heard of or mentioned James. They were supposed to be married, but my grandmother's parents, John and Mary, hated James because he was dirt poor and came from a poor family. My grandmother and James were window shopping. My gran saw beautiful handmade pillowcases, which were very expensive, and she commented how she wished that she had pillowcases like that. It took James time, but he saved up money and bought my grandmother the pillowcases. One night, a few weeks before they were married, James showed up at Betty's parents' house. He showed up drenched from all the rain. He had a smile on his face and gave the pillowcases to my grandmother. She was so happy that she cried. Gran's parents were furious that James was making her so happy. There was an altercation between James and my grandparents, Mary and John. Mary threw the pillowcases into the fireplace and they burned up. They forbade James from marrying their daughter and forbade him to ever see her again. James punched John, and Betty and James left the house. It was raining hard outside. James had only a little money to his name, but he told Betty that he was taking her to the department store to replace the pillowcases. She begged him not to. She said, "They're only stupid pillowcases. Let's just go and be free of them." On the way to the store, the car veered off the road. James had lost control due to the weather or other forces at play. The car rolled down a hill and hit a tree. James was killed immediately, but my grandmother went into a coma. In her coma, she had visions of an entire life with James. She saw all their kids grow up, all of their grandkids. She told me they struggled very much in the finance sense. They were poor, but they were very happy, and life was everything she wanted. When she woke up, her recovery took many months. She went home with her parents. One night, while in her closet, a box fell down. She opened the box, and it was 2 perfect pillowcases, the same ones James bought her. I asked my gran about the other Earth. I asked what about Grandpa Robert and all of us. She replied, "Robert existed, I'm sure, but he wasn't in my life. But I was never with him, thus none of you existed." She told us about her children and grandchildren in this other universe. She told us that JFK wasn't assassinated. He was elected to 2 terms. She said that there is so much more love and trust in the other universe. She sometimes has dreams and visions and can see her other life. She said the other universe has developed very differently than ours. And I asked, how has it developed differently from ours? She said that it is the goal of almost all the nations to end suffering for all humans, and that's the most important project. She said that she became very sick with cancer in the other universe, but the USA has universal health care for all citizens. All cancers have been cured. Poverty has been eradicated. Housing is free for all citizens. The USA helps Africa and many other nations. I said, wow, the entire planet sounds like a utopia. She said, no, something very bad happened there. I asked her, what's so bad? She paused, and she told me about a virus that the Chinese government created in the 1970s. The Chinese government tried to control their out-of-control population, but something horrible happened with the virus. The virus was released and death occurred. In that universe, the virus eradicated over 95% of people in the Chinese mainland, 75% of the people on the Indian subcontinent, and the virus killed many people around the world. It hit the USA and Canada the least, and those 2 countries are now the superpowers. the only superpowers on Earth. She told me that once the virus killed off those people, the USA diverted all military spending to medical and social welfare spendings. She told me that their technology is so much more advanced than ours. She tried to explain things to me that didn't make any sense. She told me about a scanning device that is in each home. It was scanned for all health-related issues. The scanning device is connected to some AI supercomputer. She tried to explain holographic bands for all the citizens. She called them rings of life. I still don't understand that. But she explained that they were some holographic rings that everyone had. These rings contained some data that was used for many things, including monitoring health. It could detect the virus that eradicated the Chinese and Indian population and other health issues. It was used for banking and had data on it. It was also used for communication. She said it's so completely different and better than this life. And every time she dreams of that world, she wakes up here. She doesn't want to live on this version of Earth anymore. My grandmother misses her version of Earth. And you just went down the rabbit hole.